everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. And if you are new, thanks for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today I am doing another book pairing, which is a part of a series that I've been really enjoying. I try to come up with books that have things in common, or that would be good books to read together or back to back. And for today's pairings, I'm going nonfiction. Both of these books are about the death penalty and death row. Both of these books have movies made about them. And both of these books also have what am I going to call it? Companion novels, like basically books that are related to them in some way that could also be good to read with them. So in some ways, you're getting several pairings together here. I am always interested in stories like these. I find it very interesting, especially I think it's since, Canada does not have the death penalty. And in some ways, it feels like this is something that used to happen because we used to have the death penalty in Canada. So when I hear stories about death row and people on death row, it feels very foreign to me, but I also know that this is happening in our world right now. So I don't mean for this to be a political video by any means. I am just going to talk about books that I've read on this subject that I have found interesting, and I would say that I think that they are good for discussion, like regardless of what side you might find yourself on when it comes to the many issues that these books bring up. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the books in publication order, which means that the first book is Dead Man Walking by Sister Helen Prejean. This was published in 1993, and as you can see, I have the movie cover of a book. So the film starred Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn, and is probably how most people know this story. I watched the film when it first came out in 1995, and I've had the opportunity to hear Sister Helen Prejean speak actually shortly after I watched the movie for the first time. And since then, I've had the opportunity to hear her speak several times. I've had dinner with her, and she is feisty and funny, and she's delightful. If you've seen the film, then you know it's about a man named Matthew Poncelet, who is on death row for the murder of two teenagers. And Susan Sarandon, who is playing Helen Prejean, becomes Matthew's spiritual advisor while he waits for his death. So the character of Matthew in the film is really a composite character from the men that Helen Prejean talks about in the book. Patrick Saunier is the first person that she journeyed with, and after Patrick died, this work became Helen Prejean's mission and passion. She shares the things that she has learned about the justice system, what she has learned about the people who are on death row, and what she has learned from the families of the victims as well. So it's not always easy, as you can imagine. So even if you have seen the movie, I would still highly recommend the book because it gives a fuller picture of Helen Prejean's experiences. So the book that I am pairing with this is a book that I just read this month, and I really enjoyed it, and that is Just Mercy by Bryan, Stevenson, which was published in 2014. Again, I watched the film, which came out in 2019, before reading the book, and like Dead Man Walking, Just Mercy gives a fuller picture of Bryan Stevenson's experiences. So the film focuses on Walter McMillan's case. He was convicted for the murder of, I think like an 18 or 19-year-old girl, and he was innocent. And as a lawyer, Bryan Stevenson has, helped many people on death row. So Walter McMillan being one of them. And although that case is prominent in the book is about so much more. Bryan Stevenson also focuses on like the lack of resources, the prejudice that exists in the system, how it favors people with money, white people, and he also talks about the death penalty. So one of the things that was new to me that I was troubled to hear about was the number of children that have been on death row, at least at the time. And I am so impressed by the work that Bryan does. Like Helen Prejean, there is a passion and a compassion for those who are often poor, who are facing death, and there's just a love for social justice. In Dead Man Walking, all the men that Helen talk about are guilty. Since then, she has worked with the wrongly convicted as well. Bryan goes more into the work of what this entails and how the system is so backlogged and overwhelmed that sometimes innocent people are spending decades on death row. I think one of the things that draws me to both of these stories, and really to Bryan and Helen themselves, is that they have built relationships with the people that they are serving. So Bryan talks about the importance of just being present and spending time with people as people. Helen attempts to do the same thing. So if you are familiar with these stories and you're still looking for more, then I have two more recommendations to offer. The first is a book that was published in 1998 called Forgiving the Dead Man Walking, and this is by Debbie Morris. I mentioned that Matthew Poncelet in the film Dead Man Walking was a composite character, and one of the people that the character is based on is Patrick Saunier, who I already mentioned. The other is Robert Lee Willie, who was a serial killer and another death row inmate that Helen Prejean was his spiritual advisor until his death. And after killing a young man in 1978, then he killed Faith Hathaway in 1980. A few days after the death of Faith Hathaway, Robert Lee Willie and another man picked up Debbie Morris and her boyfriend at the time. I won't tell you all the details. I won't tell you everything. But Debbie obviously survived and is able to share her story and what happened to them. She talks about the crime, the trial, what her life was like after she and her boyfriend had been kidnapped and she had been raped multiple times. She talks about what it was like when the movie Dead Man Walking came out, and how Sean Penn actually looks a lot like Robert Lee Willie. And it's true, if you look up Robert Lee Willie, he definitely looks like a young Sean Penn. Debbie also shares her experience and process of forgiveness. And I've always been really interested in this story and how it was connected to Dead Man Walking, and how even Helen and Debbie have connected as well. So another book to read alongside Just Mercy is a book that I read earlier this year, and that is The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton. He was a former cellmate of Walter McMillan, and Anthony Ray Hinton spent almost 30 years on death row for a crime that he didn't commit, and he is another person that Bryan Stevenson helped appeal his case and also befriended him. So I've talked about this book fairly recently, but I'm going to say what I appreciated the most about this book was how Anthony talks about the way he figured out ways to make a difference, like even though he was behind bars. And then the other thing that I think will always stay with me is the friendship that he has with a childhood friend, Lester. That friendship is very inspiring. So I think that Helen Prejean's book, Dead Man Walking, would pair really well with Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, especially if you are interested in books about the death penalty. These are both about people, you have a nun and a lawyer who have a heart for working with the poor and for social justice. Especially if you have seen the movies. Like, I just think the books are even better. They just add so much more to the story. The stories are more fleshed out, and they also both share more about the justice system and death penalty in general. Then, if you would like more, then we have Debbie Morris's book, which gives a victim and a survivor's perspective, and Anthony Ray Hinton's book gives an inmate's perspective. So they kind of all go together, I think. So please let me know if you have read any of these books, if you are interested in any of these books, or if you have some books that you would add to these to this pile. Are there any book pairings that you can think of about this topic, or that you think would pair well with any of these particular books here? As always, thank you for watching. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.